welcome to the .NET Core podcast, the only podcast which is devoted to .NET, ASP.NET Core, EF Core, Singular, and not forgetting you, the .NET community itself. I am your host, Jamie Gaprogman Taylor, and this is episode 76, .NET New 3 with Sayed Hashimi. In this episode, Sayed shared the history of the .NET New 3 command. I'll let Sayed go into it, but .NET New 3 is what you use when you create instances of the majority of the .NET templates for .NET Core and .NET 5 and above. And it has a really interesting story. Like, why is it called New 3, for instance? Sayed is a program manager at Microsoft and works on the ASP.NET team building tools for web developers. So let's sit back, open up a terminal, type in .NET New Podcast. There's a story about that in this episode too. And let the show begin. So thank you ever so much, Sayed, for being on the show. It's a real pleasure to talk to you because I have to say, we were saying off air just as we were setting up that I've used some of the tools that you've built almost on a daily basis. And I have to say, they're a pleasure to use, I have to say. Thank you ever so much for that. And thank you ever so much to your team or teams that have put those together. Yeah,
definitely. Thanks a lot, for having me on. And it's always nice to hear people appreciating the tools, and I'm just a small part of this, obviously, but all the credit goes to the engineering team here. I just kind of put some ideas out there, and they make it. They take my ideas and make them much better, and then actually implement that and deliver the value. So for me, I'm just kind of a very small part of this.
Well, I mean, how do I put it? I guess everyone's a small part in a machine somewhere, and without that,
that's right.
Without that part, regardless of whether it's a small part or a big part, the machine wouldn't work, right? So we're all important, is what I'm trying to get at.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So my editor is my brother, and he used to say to me at his previous role, "I don't feel like I'm important," and I said to him, without you being there, the work wouldn't get done. And the people further down the line, whatever it is you're doing, wouldn't be able to do the work they're doing. So everybody's important, right?
Yeah, I think it's easy for folks to kind of look at what they're doing and then kind of marginalize it or minimize that, and I suffer from that too, and lots of people that I work with suffer from that too. But it's hard when you're kind of working day in and day out in the weeds, but there's those times at the conferences where we can see our kind of hard work, and we see, wow, it's really we delivered a lot of really cool stuff, and added a lot of user value here. So, we do have those kind of good times too, but it's very easy to kind of get into that mindset. And, I try to avoid that sort of mindset too, but it happens. I mean, it's just the way of life,
Yeah, I guess, like you say, it is easy to feel that way. If, let's say from a tech example, right? If all you're doing today is I say if all you're doing, I don't want to try and, belittle anything that anyone's working on, but if your task for today is create an input form and you feel like, well, all I'm doing, hopefully you can hear the bunny cuss, that all I'm doing is creating an HTML input form, then you might feel like, oh, maybe my skills or whatever aren't being used to the best, but you're going to be doing other things as well, and if you're tied down to what's happening now, then what's happening right now isn't the entire experience, the entire gestalt of your abilities and skills, Oh, well. But we've talked for like 2 or 3 minutes now, and I haven't really introduced you properly, Sayed. So would you mind giving the folks who are listening a bit of an introduction to yourself? So I've already said, you've worked on these tools and you've worked with these teams, but if they haven't read the description, nobody's going to know what we're talking about, right?
Yeah, sure. No problem. Yeah. So I'm a program manager at Microsoft, Developer Tools Division. Been working in this division for like 10 and a half years, essentially. I was a ASP.NET developer before that. And, the areas that I've always kind of worked on, ASP.NET and one way or another. When I first started out at Microsoft, like the first, probably about 6, 7 years was doing, project system features. They call it project system. And you can kind of think about project system as, almost basically everything except for the editors, for web experiences, right? So I worked on that, and publishing was a big part of that. And then after that, I was living in Seattle at the time, but then I had gotten married and I had one child at the time. And I made a decision that I had to kind of move back home to Florida because, my parents, they needed a little bit more assistance, and my kids needed more room, and my child, I guess at the time, needed more room to kind of run around. I had another child since then, a son. And the way that I was able to do that was, I actually had to switch teams. So I switched over to a team that was already remote, and that was Visual Studio for Mac. So I did the ASP.NET features in Visual Studio for Mac for probably about 2 years. And then an opportunity came up for me to go back to the Web Tools team in Visual Studio. So I went ahead and did that. So that's the area that I'm working on now. The things that I specifically own are kind of different from what I owned before. So now I own the web editors, the HTML, the CSS, the JavaScript, the JSON, etc. And then also I do still own I do still own Project System, minus any sort of publish or GitHub or Azure related stuff. So those are the areas that I'm working on. And, when I was on the Web Tools team, before moving to Florida, in addition to the web project system, I also did own .NET New. And, I gave that up when I moved, to being remote. And when I came back to Web Tools, just kind of left it where it was. So now I don't own, .NET New itself. That's in the good hands of Kathleen Dollard. So she's the kind of .NET New owner. And, but we have lots of conversations because I own the kind of new project experience in Visual Studio for ASP.NET. So, we're constantly kind of, collaborating, on the project creation experience. Yeah.
That's awesome. I have to say there's a whole bunch of stuff that you've been involved in that, like I said, I use almost on a daily basis. I don't use the Visual Studio for Mac so much, but that's only because my Mac Air is sitting off camera and I've lost the power cable. Oh, wow. As soon as I find the power cable again,
you'll be back at it.
That's it. Okay. So there's a lot going on there. And I do remember we talked offline when we first sort of connected, I believe over Twitter. You were like, hey, why don't I tell you the story of .NET New? So
sure.
I was wondering, could you give us a rundown of that? So I like I said, I know of .NET New because I can open up a terminal or a command prompt or a PowerShell or a WSL, whatever, and type in, because I've got the tools installed, .NET space new, and it gives me a whole list of stuff. But that's about as far as, some people may not have even used that, right? Because some people are, the way that I've always said it is use the CLI if the CLI is making you productive. Use the user interface if it's making you productive, whichever way around.
Yeah, that's right. There's different types of developers that's out there, and there's no one kind of solution that will fit all developers there. And just like what you mentioned, there's kind of command line oriented developers that, they really care about the nitty gritty details and they want to be in absolute control of everything. And you got that class of users. And then you have the other users who are just, hey, I just want to be productive. I want to finish my goal and I want to complete my task. So there's those two kind of, opposing, viewpoints. And, our challenge is to deliver, value to both of those kind of user bases there, basically, right? So that's sometimes pretty challenging to do because they're drastically different and they have drastically different kind of wants and needs there. But I think we're moving in the right direction here. And let's say with respect to the kind of history of .NET New, it's really kind of goes far back, actually, and I was thinking about this the past couple of days too. I knew that I would be here for this podcast. So, I kind of reflected back on this and, This actually first started several years ago. My involvement in templates, basically. And I remember the moment, and I remember the time where, I first kind of got turned on to templates and realized how difficult, this problem was. So it was so I live in Jacksonville, Florida, currently, right? But this story goes back to when I was living in Seattle. But, I was back in Jacksonville at the time for, it was, I believe, the first, Code on the Beach, conference that was there, that they ever had, right? So I was there. And during like one of the breaks or the lunchtime or whatever it was, I was chatting with Rob Eisenberg, and the viewers might be familiar with his name from like Aurelia and a bunch of other kind of cool stuff that he's done. But anyways, Rob at the time was telling me, he goes, man, it's just an incredible nightmare to create and maintain templates for Visual Studio, and I had no idea about how hard it was to actually maintain the Visual Studio templates at the time. So, he kind of told me a little bit about that. And then, and then I went back and tried it out and realized, wow, this is just a giant pain in the neck, basically. And then I asked myself, I said, well, if he's having such a hard time, how is it that we're able to do this? At the ASP.NET team, because we had a bunch of templates back then, and, we still got a bunch of templates now. And what I learned from that was, we basically had one developer who, and I'm almost embarrassed to say this, we had one developer that he would spend 3/4 of his time just maintaining the templates. And let me tell you, and this guy's name is Phil Henning, and, he works with me to this day, and he works on the ASP.NET templates now. And let me tell you what, dude, if you were to talk to Phil Henning like 6-7 years back, like when he was working, man, you'd be like, dude, this guy is just totally depressed. Because he was just maintaining templates, 3/4 of his time, right? But now if you look at him, dude, templates is just a small part of what he's doing, and the guy's so excited, and he's got so much energy, and it's just a totally different thing from him. So yeah, so basically I found out that, maintaining these templates is just incredibly problematic. So then what happened was, one of my good friends is, Mads Christensen. And he used to be on the Web Tools team now, but, he's kind of focusing on some other stuff now, so he's moved on from that team. But, we're still very good friends. We talk all the time. So I was chatting with Mads, and, Mads says, hey, let's create some sort of an extension to simplify this. So then what we did was we created what we called a Sidewaffle. And Sidewaffle was kind of two things. It was a distribution pack of templates that the community had authored. But then on top of that, it was essentially like some kind of build extensions there. And, I have a kind of a deep background with him as build. So I kind of automated the process of creating an extension there with Sidewaffle. But what I realized, Sidewaffle kind of sits on top of the technology that Visual Studio has for templates. And, I call that VS Template. And, even with Sidewaffle, you could have an experience where you kind of develop your template, and then you could do like a Control F5 and test it. But at the end of the day, you were still building on top of that VS Template technology that was really the crux of the issue. So then even after Sidewaffle was done, we realized that, hey, this is great. We made it a little bit easier. But, for template authors, there's still a huge burden of maintenance here. So that was kind of one kind of input, right? And then I was working with a developer. His name is Mike Lorbetsky. And unfortunately, he's not at Microsoft anymore. He also kind of moved back home and took a different gig there. But man, Mike Lorbetsky is really great. I really love Mike Lorbetsky. He's one of the most passionate developers I've ever worked with. And he's really great about making things perform well. But anyways, so we were chatting with Mike Lorbetsky and coming up with some ideas, and we created some side projects too. So that was that. And then what happened was, like right when ASP.NET Core was picking up, and I'm not even sure what the name of it was back then, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't ASP.NET Core. I think it was Project K. So, we called it Project K, and then we realized, we said, hey, we need a way to create templates cross-platform, because, ASP.NET is going to be cross-platform for the first time. And at that time, I got hooked up with an intern. I was like an intern manager. And the intern that came over was Sarab, and he's actually a PM on the ASP.NET team now. And we were just chatting, and we came up with the idea of creating a command line experience for mostly for Mac developers, but it would work cross platform for creating templates. And there was already a very kind of popular templating system for web developers known as Yeoman. So we created a Yeoman plugin. I forget a Yeoman generator is what they call it. So we created a Yeoman generator for Project K for ASP.NET. And then, man, that got like lots of usage. We were like getting to the top of the list of Yeoman generators. We were in the top 10 for sure. I forget the specific number, but man, it was lots of people used it. I was really shocked, actually. And then as kind of ASP.NET Core kind of progressed, then you said, hey, well, it doesn't make sense so Yeoman's built on top of like Node and NPM. So we're like, it doesn't make sense to ask .NET developers to install Node, to create their project. So we need something that's kind of built into .NET itself. And then the way that first kind of started out was, I wasn't even involved in the very kind of first .NET New, and even when I actually kind of found out about it by surprise, basically. So at that time, it was very kind of early days of the SDK, and all the commands, they were like they were like almost kind of essentially hard coded in. Maybe not really hard coded, but they had to be contained in like a specific assembly, basically, right? So, and then at that point, when you did .NET New, there was very a very minimal kind of options. You could create a console project, and it wasn't even like parameterized. You would say .NET New console, and it would spit out the exact same files every time. And I think there was a web one there too, and it would spit out the exact same files as well. And then, that kind of, worked for a little bit, like the first one or two previews maybe. And then, that's when I kind of got wind of it. And then, Damian Edwards was working on a proposal for templates. And at this time, you couldn't create a command that had the same name, as a command that was already built in, because the built-in command would take precedence, right? And Damian was working on a prototype, and he called it .NET New 2. And then that was his prototype, and he had some ideas basically, and then me and Mike Lorbetsky, we got involved, and we said, hey, dude. Oh, so let me kind of lay the framework for this, right? So when you look at Visual Studio for managed kind of managed development, when you look at that, the team that has a lot of investment in templates is really ASP.NET. So I told Mike, I said, hey, we're already heavily invested in templates, and between the two of us, we have a lot of experience with templates too, because, by this time we had created like 3 or 4 different side projects trying to address templates. There was Side Waffle, there was like Pecan Waffle, there was like .NET Waffle. And then we said, let's just put together a really good proposal. And then what we should try and do is we should actually just try and take ownership of this whole thing. That way we can run it ourselves. And then we put together this really good proposal, and there was like a GitHub thread that was going on at the time, and it was owned by somebody else who's not at Microsoft anymore. We called him Z. So he kind of owned it, and then I made this like GitHub comment and say, hey, here's my ideas for templates, and this is the way that it should be. And then Mike created a prototype, and it was called .NET New 3. So that's how we got the name of .NET New 3. And then we just kind of worked it through. We said, hey, dude, this is what we got. And, we're way ahead of what you guys are doing and what you guys are even thinking. We're just gone far beyond. So, we really need to own this ourselves so we can build it and run it. And then, we were able to convince people to go ahead and give it to us. So we took over it, and and it was me and Mike Lorbetsky, dude, and man, he would come up with some crazy ideas, and he would just go and implement it at like 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. I'm pretty sure Mike Lorbetsky just doesn't sleep at all. And then, that's kind of how it started. And then, I think we have a pretty good model here, because every other template system that I've ever worked with requires you to change your source code in a way that it won't build anymore. So what I mean by that is let's take like VS template, for example, right? Let's say if I've got like a program.cs, I'm going to have to modify the namespace declaration in a way to where it won't build anymore, right? Like I think there are like percent signs or dollar signs or something, but it'd be like percent root namespace percent or dollar sign. I'm not sure. I just don't remember. But anyways, that's never going to build. And then the fundamental problem with templates is, you've got your source code and then you've got your template. And if those two things differ, every time you build a new version of it, you're going to have to go through and do some sort of manual modifications to that, right? And that is just really a nightmare. And, imagine you've got, let's say if you've got 5 or 6 templates, that becomes a management nightmare, right? So it's really incredible. So with the template engine, and, for those who don't know, the template engine is the library that .NET New sits on top of, and Visual Studio also calls into the template engine, and the same for Visual Studio for Mac. And there's also some third-party IDEs that also kind of call into the template engine there. So yeah, the model that the template engine uses, we kind of flip it on its head. We say, hey, instead of modifying your code to indicate where the replacements are, you're going to go and indicate these replacements in a different file that's called template.json. Right. So let's say if you had a project that was called Cool Web. Yeah, we kind of flip it on its head, and then inside the template.json file is where you would basically indicate, say, hey, and I want Cool Web to be replaced with whatever the project name is that the user has provided for me. So that's kind of the model that we use. But it's actually a lot trickier than what I thought, because let's say if you have that string Cool Web, and let's say the C is capitalized, and maybe it's actually cool.web. So what happens is, when you do a replacement for that in a C# class, you have certain restrictions. There are certain characters that you can't use, right? So let's say if the user gave the name as like MySpace web, right? We would have to know that in a C# class, we would have to use an underscore for that. But in other file types, they may have different forms that they could use, right? Like, for example, there's certain files that everything has to be lowercase. And there's certain files that, the separator is not an underscore. Maybe it's a dot. But I wasn't smart enough to figure that out. But fortunately, Mike Lorbetsky was smart enough to think about that. And he said, hey, when we get a string, there's different possible transformations that it needs to go through. So we need to take that into account. So the template engine already has that. So if there are certain restrictions of, how a string gets transformed, the template engine will figure that out, basically. So that's pretty interesting. And we also did the same, kind of for optional content. What we did was we said, hey, for C#, we'll use the C# preprocessor syntax. That way, what you can do is you can always test your template. Like let's say if you've got it in a preprocessor block that's ifed, you can set that value, and then you can run it, and then you'll test that part, and then you can go and set a different value and test it. So I think that's kind of the history of how we came to .NET New. And let me also kind of clarify, for those who are not familiar with .NET New 3, what happens is, the template engine is, it's open source, and if you pull down that GitHub repository and you build it, you'll get a new command in that command prompt session that's .NET New 3. So, if you do .NET New, you'll be running off, whatever version of the SDK that you have installed. But if you do .NET New 3, then that will be working off the version that you just built there, basically. And so that was kind of the history of .NET New 3. And then we just kind of left it as .NET New 3. That way we can keep doing the side-by-side, and we don't have to worry about conflict and what version of .NET New am I using here. That's kind of how we got to it. And, templates, I've been working on templates for a long time, and, there's kind of two spaces in tooling that I could say that I really love, and I think publishing is one of those. That was probably my original kind of love, I think, was publishing. But I think templates is the kind of the next one after that, and man, I really love the space of templates, and I had no idea how complicated it was to create and maintain these templates, but, I think now we've come with a pretty good solution. Obviously, it can be improved and simplified, but, I think it's much better for the community. For example, AWS has a template pack, and I think there's more than 20 templates inside that template pack. And I can tell you with certainty, they would never have done that with the existing technology that was there. And even I heard other horror stories too, like Nancy FX. That was a pretty popular web framework in the past that was, open source. And so the story of Nancy was, they developed their C# templates, and then a community member contributed the VB version of it. But then when Nancy FX got updated, it was so hard to update the templates that they had to abandon the VB part of it, and then they just went with the C# part of it. But I'm pretty confident that if a framework owner gets in that situation with .NET New, I'm pretty sure they would continue on, because all you have to do is create a project. You don't have to. It's way easier maintenance. I mean, so yeah, I think we've come with something really great here for the community.
Yeah, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there when you were saying that in the previous iteration, the Visual Studio templates, you had to make it so that it wouldn't run. You can't compile your template anymore. Whereas in the past, when I've created templates for the .NET New templating engine for .NET New 3, it is quite literally, I mean, you said it there, you get to the point where your code is working, you create a template.json, and it's a template. There's hardly any work there.
Yeah, that's right.
And I've seen it at a previous employer. We had a specific sort of template.NET stack that we would use, and one of the developers went away and spent 2 or 3 days building a WinForms app, where you'd fire up the WinForms app and you type in a bunch of stuff into some input fields, maybe like the name of the project or the name of the client or something like that. You'd hit go and then walk away for 2 minutes and come back, because what would happen was it was running a regex on a project that already existed and running through every single file, and then to sort of rename namespaces and set values, and then it would then compile it to make sure it worked. And if it failed, it would say, sorry, that didn't work, try again. Whereas now I literally would do .NET New, name of the project, and then maybe pass some parameters in for base namespace, or maybe I'm using Tailwind instead of Bootstrap, or maybe I want to include jQuery and Font Awesome, and I just include a bunch of parameters, and within a second, it's there.
Yeah, that's right. So yeah, I'll tell you something that I found was really kind of interesting. I already kind of said, Mike Lorbetsky, man, he would create some super performant code. In the first version of .NET New that went out, me and Mike, we compared the time that it took to, let's say if you had a folder that was called, foo. So we would create a template out of that, and then we would run it through .NET New to see how long it would take to instantiate that template into a different folder. Right. And then we compared that, and then we took that and we compared it. Let's say, hey, if I just copied the foo folder and Windows Explorer to another place, how long does that take? And .NET New actually was faster than that. And then it was doing all the processing and all that sort of stuff too. And Mike, he really just, he hates regular expressions, so he avoided any sort of regular expression usage there. And man, he made it super fast. And, I think to this day, it's actually very performant. But we've added a lot of additional features since then, so it's probably not at the same kind of performance as what it was before. But wow, I think it's still really fast. I think you could create a template with 1,000 files, and your experience would still be pretty good using that on the command line, I think. Yep.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And like I say, I mentioned it in the intro to the show. I say, sit back, open up a terminal, type in .NET New podcast, and that's an open source template I have for the show notes. Like, you can go to GitHub and pull that template down if you really wanted to. It's in the old template format. I know that there's a bunch of changes that have happened, because this was like .NET Core 1.0 when I made it, or maybe 1.1. And you can still pull that template and still install it and still do .NET New podcast, and it will create the show notes for you. I do have another one that I've created for, I scaffolded an audition project for editing the show, and I could do .NET New edit podcast, and all the files are there.
Yeah, right.
Because why not? Because we were talking off air about you can do it with any almost any sort of file format you wanted. Primarily, it's for text-based files, right, for source code. But yeah, all I did was I took a pre-existing bunch of files because Audition just uses XML, right? So take that, throw a template.json in it, tell .NET this is a project, and the project is massive. But it's like 200, 300 megabytes because there's a bunch of like audio clips in there as well. But when you hit .NET New Audio, it just, there it is.
Yeah, right, exactly. So I think, yeah. So a couple comments on that. I think it's really kind of great what people are doing with the template engine and tools and platforms and frameworks in general. And, I'm always kind of surprised the kind of cool, innovative things that people come up with. So that was one. And then two, oh yeah, that's right. Yeah. So you mentioned, that these are kind of mostly markdown files. So yeah, the template engine is kind of agnostic to the file type. It doesn't really matter what type of file it is. We can go through and process that. For certain languages, we kind of mentioned about the transformations and limitations to syntax. So let's say if you were dealing with a different type of file, you might need to author some JSON that tells the template engine, what are the requirements for tokens that appear in this file. And then from there, the template engine will know how to transform those. So, if you were to go and look at the template engine repository, you would see JSON definitions for, let's say, C# files or CSS files, JS files, so on and so forth. But let's say if there's a language out there that somebody has created, and let's say it's called foo, and if you want to get first class support from the template engine, you would basically go through and create that JSON file. And there's a way to just put that inside your template as well. But you could also even contribute it back to the template engine itself, and then they would consider bringing that in. But yeah, there's no limitation for files here, and we've built everything in a very kind of generic fashion. And then I'm pretty sure we can process and modify binary files in addition to text files, and that was something that Mike did, but not sure if that's ever been tested or not, but I believe it does have that capability. But yeah, it's really incredible, man. Really incredible. And, the community, man, they surprise me every day with the kind of cool stuff that they come up with, man. It's really wild, when we were building template engine, I never kind of envisioned somebody would use it for a .NET New podcast that was kind of pulling over, audio and video files and markdown and all that kind of stuff. But, that's the cool part about creating, kind of more generic tools is, you're going to get surprised by the cool stuff people create.
That's it. That's, and that was just, I'm sitting around thinking, right, I want to build something with the template engine. What is something that I'm doing constantly? Oh, wait, I'm copying these files to a new folder, then manually editing a bunch. Wait a minute, I could do that. I'm sure I can figure out how to do that. And lo and behold, it's throw a template.json file in there, do a little bit of wiring up, go into the command line, create a NuGet package for it. I mean, I self-host that NuGet package, but even so, and then .NET new install, and it's there. And then what I've actually done is my editor is not a developer. I've just gone, here is the template. Whenever you want to do a new one, just do .NET new podcast. Enter,
yeah, right.
It will just be there, right? And he's not a developer, but he knows I go into the command line and type this in because it's faster, like I said, than him going, right, I'll copy the pre-existing template over. Now I've got to change it. It just makes sense, right?
Yeah, and there's all sorts of opportunity for human error in there, especially with repetitive tasks, I mean, if you're doing the same thing every week or every day, at some point you're going to make some sort of mistake there for sure. There's no doubt, So yeah, I mean, you want to simplify all that as much as you can.
Absolutely. And I mean, that's kind of why we do, like we talk about CI/CD DevOpsy things, because it is so easy to accidentally push the wrong button and push the wrong, like I still remember right click, publish to zip file, copy up to an FTP server, and then do it from there. And that was so fraught with danger.
Yeah. That's right. Was that an MS deploy package, the zip file that you were creating there?
Oh, I mean, this was back in amateur hour days. So this was like
Oh,
right
okay,
click the
way back in the
project,
day, huh?
publish to zip file
Yeah,
manually. I
right.
right click publish, and then open up an FTP, drag and drop, and
Sure.
then take a backup of the previous one, and
Hmm.
then splat the new one over the top. Hopefully, those are the bad old days. Hopefully.
Yeah.
If there's people out there doing that, I'm not going to try and poo-poo on what you're doing. I'm just saying, please maybe
Hmm.
investigate in some tools that can do that for you.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, there are people that still do stuff like that, and there's also definitely people who just kind of publish directly to their production website from Visual Studio. But my philosophy is, it's my job to help users achieve their goals and also try to steer them in the right direction. But at that same time, if somebody doesn't want to go in that direction, it's my job to try to support them. But I don't own publishing anymore. But I'll tell you that publishing from Visual Studio to a remote website is a very common operation. And, there's a certain class of people who believe that nobody does that or that nobody should do that. But, at the end of the day, they got their different priorities and their different concerns. And, maybe like an automated publish is not for them. But, obviously, we try to encourage that. But hey, whatever it is, man, I mean, that's how it is. If, like, let's say if somebody buys a steak knife and they want to, cut other things with it besides steaks, hey, that's what they want to do. They have every right to do it.
I feel like it loops slightly back around to what I said about earlier on about if you want to use the command line and you feel you are more productive with it, please do that. But if you want to use an app and a wizard and a WYSIWYG, then please do that too. If you're more productive, like you say, if the end goal is ship this to the server now, and don't worry about if it doesn't work because we have some other system, then right click publish to server makes total sense and it gets the job done instantly. Whereas if you have a slightly, let's say you have an Azure DevOps pipeline, you then have to commit the code, you've got to wait for the build, you've got to wait to promote, then you've got to wait again to promote, and then again to, presumably you have multiple staging servers. Whereas all you wanted to do was right click publish, regardless of whether you, and here come the bunny quotes, should, because like you said, in some instances, maybe you should, and some instances, maybe you shouldn't.
Yeah.
But if your goal is right click publish, then having a right click publish solves that problem.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah. I mean, we got to meet the users where they're at. We can't, I think, Microsoft in the past has tried to force people down certain paths. And I think we figured out, hey, this is not the right approach. We should meet them where they're at, but at the same time, offer additional paths to best practices or what we consider best practices. Right. And I think that's the right way to do things. If you have some sort of immediate need, let's try to solve that need, but then let's also see, is there a better way to meet this need too? And if so, let's provide that possibility as well. But, we shouldn't force users, down certain paths. It's just not a good, it doesn't work well for Microsoft doing things like that, I think.
I mean, that makes sense. If you make it easier to fall into the pit of success, whatever success means in that instance, then more people are likely to use the tools, which means more people are likely to use the language and likely to do whatever it is that they're doing. If it's easier to fall into the pit of success, I'm going to go down that path. But if it's easier to fall into the pit of failure, I want to avoid that path as much as I can, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Because I don't want to fail all the time. I want to succeed as easily as possible. Mm-hmm. And if right-click publish, if .NET new, then if that helps me to achieve those, or file new inside of Visual Studio and I get a WYSIWYG, then yeah, fantastic. If that helps me to solve that problem, let's do it.
Yeah, that's right. That's right, dude. Yeah, I think we're kind of on the same page with that,
I think so. Yeah, excellent. What I'll say, Sayed, is I know that you have a limited amount of time today. You're a very busy person, and we're unfortunately running out of time. So I was wondering, I've already got some links from you for the show notes, and some links that I've sort of found and you've sort of added to. So thank you very much for that. But I was wondering, where can people go to find out a little bit more, maybe about you and maybe about the work that you're doing and things like that? Is there somewhere people can go? Do you have any recommended resources? I know of obviously things like Channel 9 and stuff, but is that the best place? I'm not sure.
I think, I think, let's say for people who are interested to try to follow up with what I've got going on, probably Twitter is the right place. And, I've seen that you've got the link there for that. And then for folks who are interested in, learning more about templates, I think a good place to start off is the aka.ms/netcore-templates. And I see you've got that in your notes as well. So that will take users to a GitHub repository there, and there's links to how to create a template, but then there's also a lot of content as to, hey, here's best practices for authoring templates, and also including, what's one thing we didn't talk about is, if you create a template with .NET New, it can also start showing up in Visual Studio, and that same thing will happen for Visual Studio for Mac too. So there's a lot of content over there that says, what all additions do you need to make to your template to have a great experience in Visual Studio, right? Like, how do I get an icon there, and how do I get parameters to show up in Visual Studio? So I've got all that content there. And there's also, within the past couple months, we recorded, I think it was 6 or 7 videos on .NET New, and it started from, how to use .NET New to how to create templates and how to add parameters and how to troubleshoot those templates. So I think that playlist or the list of videos is really great for template authors. And if anybody has questions about, how do I do this with templates, or how do I do that with templates? One area that you can do that you can ask that question is on GitHub. So it's github.com/.net/templating. You can file an issue over there. Or you could reach out to myself and or Kathleen Dollard on Twitter, and we'll try to direct you to the right place as well. So I think that's kind of a good way to kind of keep up with everything that's happening there. And also in the show notes, I left a link for a website that I created that will enable users to find existing templates that are out there. And we're still working on, what's going to be the story of how do users search for templates at the command line, and also working on the experience of how are users going to search and install templates directly in Visual Studio, but we're not quite there yet. So I think that's really cool too. This is, we created a system where, you can have a template, and then it can show up in multiple different areas, right? Like the command line with .NET New, or Visual Studio on Windows, or Visual Studio for Mac, and then also those third-party IDEs and editors that have support for it. And it's a first-class integration. If you look at when you're using Visual Studio, if you create an ASP.NET Core project, that's using the template engine. But the majority of the other templates use VS Template, and, to a user, they can't tell the difference between one or another. So I think we've done that in a really kind of first class and a really kind of great way for that. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I have to agree. It's wonderful to use the template engine and .NET new 3 because it is seamless. Like you said, you're in Visual Studio, file a new project, it's there. You're in the command line, .NET New, it's there. You can't make it any easier than that, right?
That's right. That's where it's at, man.
Excellent. Well, thank you ever so much, Sayed, for taking some time to talk to me today. I really appreciate it. And I think that the listeners are going to get a lot out of this, because I do know a lot of people who are .NET folks using, say, .NET 5, and they're not sure about that they can even create a template from a working project. So maybe this will spur them on to go and create some new projects, and then maybe let you and Kathleen know, hey, I've created a project to do, like, I don't know, 3D modeling or something. Who knows?
Yeah, that'd be great. I think for those people who are kind of aspiring to create a template, I think those videos are a good start. I think it'd be probably 20, 25 minutes, and they'll know how to, not only use .NET New, but also create a template from that. And then as they want their template to get more and more kind of more and more features, they can kind of watch a few more videos and then kind of dive deeper even beyond those. Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. Well, like I said, thank you ever so much, Sayed. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Oh, thank you for having me. Same here.
That was my interview with Sayed Hashimi about .NET New 3. Be sure to check the show notes for a bunch of links to some of the stuff that we covered and a full transcription of the interview. The show notes, as always, can be found at .netcore.show, and there will be a link directly to them in your podcatcher. And don't forget to spread the word. Leave me a rating or review on your podcatcher of choice. Head over to .netcore.show/subscribe for ways to do that, and to come back next time for more .net goodness. I'll see you again real soon. See you later, folks. The .NET Core podcast is a production of RJJ Software Limited.